And welcome, everyone. It is a pleasure to have you from wherever you're coming from, and if it's morning, afternoon, or evening. Today is going to be a fascinating conversation. We are going to talk to three outstanding entrepreneurs and learn about how they're building their businesses, everything from the challenges they face to the opportunities they see. We'll talk about textiles and the farming industries, innovation around the environment, uses of data, and really what it means to create a sustainable future for us all. Let me go ahead and introduce our three panelists. First, we have Jessica Schreiber. She's the founder and CEO of FabScrap. Next, we have Nidhi Pant. She's the co-founder of S4S Technologies. And finally, Clementine Chambon, who is the co-founder of Orja. Jessica, would you please start by introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about FabScrap?
Sure. Hello, everyone. I'm really happy to be here today and hear about everything that Global Good Fund alumni and fellows are working on. I'm Jessica Schreiber. I was a 2022 fellow. The organization that I started is called FabScrap. It's a nonprofit. We're based in New York City, and we work primarily with the fashion industry to recycle and reuse textiles. Most people think of used clothing, used sheets, used home goods, but we actually work with the industry on pre-consumer textile waste, all of the waste that's created in the creation of those products. So we work with over 800 fashion companies in the US, and we collect all of their unused materials from the design process, and we create thrift stores for that product so that fashion designers, costume makers, home sewers, quilters, crafters, creators of all kinds have access to that material, and it stayed from landfill, while giving those brands some environmental data on their impact in not sending that material to landfill.
Great, thank you. Nidhi, please introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nidhi Pant, and I'm the co-founder of Science for Society. We convert the ugly produce, imperfect produce that does not get the right price in the market to food ingredients by enabling farmers to process their lower grade produce by setting up these small farm factories for them. So the farmers can now convert their produce to food ingredients and earn an assured additional income. So we transform smallholder women farmers to become processors by enabling all sort of food processing by providing them technology, access to finance, and market linkage. We aggregate these processed produce from them, whatever, so from say a tomato to a ketchup is what they produce. And we aggregate this and supply to large companies such as Unilever, Nestle, Marico, Indian Railways, and to 2,000 more institutional customers. We work with 100,000 farmers and 2,000 entrepreneurs. All our units are solar powered. So we provide them with solar dehydrators, solar milling machines, biomass-based dehydrators, or grinding machines, so different solar food processing equipments in their factories.
Great. And Clementine, if you would introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about Orja.
Yeah, sure. So hi, everyone. My name is Clementine, and I'm a co-founder of Orja Development Solutions. So at Orja, what we're trying to do is to solarize the agriculture sector and focusing on the needs of smallholder farmers. So there are hundreds of millions of smallholder farmers across the world who grow most of our food. And we focus on the Indian context, where many of those farmers are using fossil fuels on a daily basis. And they use things like diesel for running agricultural machinery like irrigation pumps or some of the agricultural machinery that Nidhi was also telling us about. So what we do is we come in as a farming as a service company, and we install solar-powered infrastructure, mainly for irrigation, milling, and cooling. And then we sell affordable services that are solar-powered to smallholder farmers. So they can basically stop using diesel and transition to solar, which is cheaper, more reliable. And also, yeah, so obviously helping the environment by stopping the use of fossil fuels, but also helping smallholders to earn a better income.
Great. So it's clear that we as a global society face a tremendous amount of challenges. We can talk about everything from climate change at large to things like ocean acidification or all the waste that's being created. I'd like to know from each of you, what are the key challenges that you face in your organizations today, and what are you doing to overcome them? Let's start with Nidhi.
Yes, I think the most important part for us is that for smallholder farmers, the affording anything is a challenge. We specifically work with women farmers. These are new to credit. Any sort of adoption that requires first needs initial amount of trust to be built. Second, for expecting farmers to pay for any product or a service is a challenge unless and until they don't see so many results. So providing affordable financing for them to start any new business is important. And the third thing is more from the market end, is that we do see that there are some companies who are a little forward looking, would be happy to pay for a market which provides you traceability of produce, or produce which is a lot more sustainable, but the premium is not offered. So there is no incentive for any company to sort of not do. Just imagine at an S4S, we are democratizing food processing for the farmers. Whatever was happening in the central facility is now happening in these small units. So for any company to take up or to do a decentralized processing, unless and until there is some premium that is offered for all the extra hard work that you do, which is set up these entire value chain for farmers, connect them to the right markets, the premium is not available. So there is no incentive. You really need to match whatever is the commodity, whatever is price the market offers. So even your large companies like Unilever or Nestle who have sustainability goals, this is a procurement cost for them. So their targets every year is to decrease their procurement cost and not increase it by offering some additional amount for transparency or traceability. So yes, for us, the challenges are on the both end. On one end, for the farmers, and since we work with women, training them, getting them access to financing, building that trust is one challenge. And the second is definitely have the larger customers also pay for traceability of the produce or a premium as it is directly coming from the farmers, so that we can pass it on to a significant amount to them.
You know, it's interesting. I heard you say trust several times in that answer, and I imagine that that's something that many environmentalists and many entrepreneurs are dealing with, no matter where it is within their organization. Clementine, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, some of the challenges that Nidhi mentioned are familiar. So we obviously also work with smallholder farmers, and they've been, ripped off at every step of the way by other parties. So, it takes time to build their trust. So for us, what we're really doing is we're actually building infrastructure, right? We're building solar, we are solarizing farms. So we need to invest in infrastructure, and it's quite capital intensive. So while it's more cost effective for the farmer in the long run to switch from fossil fuel to solar. In fact, the payback periods are relatively short, but of course, there's an upfront capital cost for the infrastructure. So that makes our model a little bit capital intensive, because we obviously, to reach scale, will need to build out a lot of solar plants. And that scale is inherent with environmental challenges, right? There are, it requires significant investment. So for us, it's about finding, a balance between, being able to work it's essentially figuring out how to work at scale. So currently we reach out to smallholder farmers, not exactly individually, but, on a community level, we go out there, we form these relationships with the community, and then we install our assets. Going forward, we're going to keep doing that, because that is key to being, inclusive and being able to reach out to low-income farmers. But we're also looking to introduce a B2B vertical as well. So working with larger, agribusinesses, for example, that also work with smallholders and using them as a channel to reach scale. So I guess that's another challenge, is about, finding a pathway to scale, either through, still working as a private company, or potentially partnering with, larger organizations who might want to replicate or, partner with you on your journey. And another general challenge that I think is crucial when we talk about climate specifically, I mean, also generally the environment, but from a climate perspective, is this sort of inequity in resources and focus of those resources. So when we talk about decarbonizing, we tend, I mean, a lot of the debate is about, of course, decarbonizing industrialized countries, which are also the biggest emitters. But then there's the other end, which is who actually suffers from, runaway climate change that we're facing today. And it's mostly low-income rural people in places like rural India who, of course, are not part of the conversation. So it's challenging to find climate solutions that also work for them. And so I think that inclusivity angle is another challenge that more environmentally focused entrepreneurs should be focusing on.
So Jessica, we've heard trust, we've heard scale, we've heard inclusivity. Do some of those resonate with you?
Yeah, definitely. I was going to start with scale, and for us, that's volume of waste that exists. So globally, there's 52 million tons of textile waste created, and that's created to make clothing. About 12% of that gets wasted just in the design and production process. If we're really conservative and say 2% of that is the design process, which is where fab scrap works, and we make that pounds for Americans here, that's 2.2 billion pounds every year that's wasted. And that's natural resources. That's either the cotton and silk and or that if it's synthetics, it's polyester, which is plastic and going into our waterways. So there's just a massive amount of material. And one of the challenges that we've had is keeping up with how much waste there is. We're 7 years into our operations now. We're still adding 5 to 10 new companies to our service every month. New companies who understand the need that this shouldn't be going to landfill, it should be reused and recycled, and looking for that solution. We're picking up about 6,000 pounds a week, which is a lot. I think one of the challenges is operational, and that textile waste anywhere in the world right now is still sorted manually. There's not a mechanized system for that. And so it's a lot to process and handle to get it to where it can be recycled or reused. I would say culturally too, there's been sort of a need to change the way that the fashion industry thinks about its waste. And part of that is people for so long have just assumed textiles that are unwanted should be donated. And really what we're receiving is not always usable material. Sometimes it's like little 6-inch swatches, which isn't technically a donation in the way that I think people intend it to be. And so we've really had to work with sort of the industry to change that verb of, you are not donating textile waste to us, you are recycling textile waste with us, and making that part of their operational costs, the same way that they pay for paper recycling or metal, glass, and plastic recycling and trash pickup. They should be paying for their textile waste because it's a byproduct of their operations. It's waste happening at their company, and it should be internalized as part of their bottom line. So changing that sort of culturally from donate to recycle has been a big obstacle, while also there's so many companies who see the need for this to make sure that we're not just a checkbox and not just greenwashing. That's a big one, is sort of like, oh, great, this is something easy that we can do to sort of check that box and provide some data, but we want to make sure that brands are also making internal changes to reduce that waste at the source. And so that's been a lot of our work this year and research this year, is moving beyond just recycling and reuse and not being just a checkbox for companies, but starting to give them options for how to actually reduce the waste that we're seeing come through the design process.
You know, Jessica, you mentioned changing the narrative. And with our work at Literati, we're on this mission to create a litter-free world and ensure that waste is kept in the system. Part of that process for us encompasses changing the narrative, whether it's with producers themselves, with the environmentalists, with government, and those who are creating policy. I'm curious, how have you found emerging trends, which are also a way of changing the narrative, right? How have you found new emerging trends, new innovations to either help or hinder your ability to get people on board with what you're doing?
Yeah, I would say there's sort of a trend now to, we have a lot of companies who ask us, well, when you're recycling the fabric, does it become fabric again? Can I like make a product out of recycled fabric? And unfortunately, the technology is really not quite there yet. Most of the times when you see things that are made out of recycled polyester, they're actually made out of recycled water bottles. We're not taking polyester back into polyester. And so in some ways, I think some of the language that's used in recycling actually hinders the development of the technology and the sorting that is needed to actually create the infrastructure that can handle real volume. And then, like I was saying, I think there's a lot of greenwashing. I hate to use that term as sort of just like a paintbrush, but there's sort of a lot of hiding behind terminology that people present because they know consumers are looking for companies who are like who match their values, I think is sort of the way that companies are trying to meet consumers where they're at. They want to like match consumer values, but that usually comes with sort of like key phrases that may or not be entirely true, that they don't always have to entirely back up. And so I think wrapped up in all of this is a need to like really check data to understand systems and processes, and that's probably something that is happening across the environmental space.
And Nidhi, as for us, are you finding that innovation and new emerging trends are really adding to your ability to get to market? Are you finding it to be a challenge? How's that working out for you?
Yes, I think a lot of new innovations as well as platforms do help you go to market a lot more faster. But at the end of the day, it needs to make a lot more commercial sense. I mean, that is at least in India, on the innovation end, the market is a little slow. Even if you have like a proven demonstrated technology, rather than the technology, you would want to sell, or you would want to see what does it do for you. Does it save cost, energy, time, anything? And at the end, it needs to translate in what does it does for us or our customer. Does it help them work better, increase? So say iotization does help us make better quality of the produce, guide them on how they can increase transparency and traceability, and thus also link them with premium buyers. So some of these technologies are very helpful. With AI, we are able to also, like we process more than 60,000 tons in sort of 800 different units. It's very decentralized. Quality control is a big challenge for us. So for some of these technologies are really, really good, but the cost of the adoption also for us is extremely high. If you like connect it with like a sorting machine, there is a huge capex cost involved, and such smallholder farmers are not able to afford that, and us as a company need to support that. So it really boils down to whether you get that premium for that quality by using some really advanced technologies. So it really translates a little bit more from a financial trade-off.
It sounds like what I hear you saying is that innovation for innovation's sake doesn't really make nearly the difference as innovation when there's a clear benefit for your end user or your customer or your partner.
Absolutely. It needs to be customer centric, and it needs to be orbit shifting. Also, a very gradual or minor sort of upgradation in the technology sometimes makes it more redundant, unless and until it is not substantially sort of like increasing something like quality. It is for us, it's say very important. Adopting AI is really helping us do various grades of the produce and sell it to different buyers, like an export market or a domestic market, and helps us get that premium. Whether that premium is substantial or not is what we need to decide on. So yes, it needs to be customer centric for sure.
Clementine, are you finding a similar sort of situation?
So for us, I mean, we're actually a business model innovator, so we don't develop or design our own technology, but of course, we're always looking for ways to improve our operations. The challenge often can be, so just to give a concrete example, a lot of our processes are manual, so they're done, out in the field. We of course, we have a pretty decent sized field team for that. So we need to collect data, we need to record transactions, etc. We do a lot of that manually today, and then it gets digitized later on. So it's a slow and more, painstaking process. And of course, errors can get introduced. And there's ways to digitize everything now, right? From like payments to transaction records, etc. But the technology still needs to be robust enough for it to work, in your operation. So that's a road sort of stumbling block that we often face is like, do the new technologies actually work in your environment where you're trying to sort of, have them make an impact on your operations. But having said that, yeah, there are some other areas that we've been able to sort of benefit from. And one that I would mention is Of course, we work in renewable energy. We've started to be able to monetize the carbon emission savings that we make for our customers. So we now sell decentralized renewable energy certificates. So from these decentralized solar projects, for every unit of electricity that we generate, we can directly demonstrate we're replacing fossil fuel. So now we can, through intermediaries, we are able to sort of sell that credit. And why that's useful to us is, of course, it helps us to generate additional revenue that we can then reinvest in additional solar capacity. So that's, I think, a recent innovation, which the starting point for that was, of course, we all know about carbon credits, and I'm not going to debate their merits here, but this is basically, it's a more accessible way for small startups to be able to access the carbon market without having to undergo a really costly and time-consuming registration process.
Now, you brought up data, and I think it's an obvious statement for us to say that data is important. I'm curious, how is data specifically important to each of your organizations? And are there areas that you're finding it to be either difficult to collect, difficult to analyze, difficult to make sense of? Jessica.
I have a background working in New York City's government from the New York City Department of Sanitation. And so I think that set me up for almost overkill in data collection. And so at our organization, we measure everything. We weigh material as it comes in by brand. We weigh material as it's sorted by brand. We weigh material when it leaves and where it's going. So we can really track like from start to finish where the material is in our organization, and we're able to provide that back to the companies that work with us. And I think it's one of the first times that they've ever had any kind of transparency into their waste stream. And it's really valuable for them. Like I said, in a lot of ways, they use it for their own marketing. During Earth Month, a lot of brands start requesting their data for the last year. And so in the ways that we charge for recycling, that's part of what we're charging for, is all of that data collection. And I think it's a really valuable piece of the service for brands because it gives them so much insight. And what we're hoping over time is that as brands start to see the waste that's been coming to us, it gives them decision-making power to understand what we're able to reuse, what we're able to recycle, what goes to landfill and why, to make different sourcing choices, to make different design choices, to start to reduce that waste. And particularly there's like the incentive there of, if they're charged for how much waste they're recycling with us, it would reduce their costs to have alternatives to that waste. So we use data in everything that we do. And also as an organization and as a nonprofit, it's part of our annual reports. It's how we fundraise. It's really core to everything. And so beyond just the fabric that we measure how many volunteers we've had. We've had over 10,000 people volunteer with us. We measure how many schools we reach out to, the education that we do, the number of panels that we're on, and hours that we spent talking in sustainable fashion as part of like our outreach and measuring our effectiveness as an organization.
So it sounds like you're collecting data that has both an internal use as well as an external. If we focus on the external for a second, you talked about, I think you said, we collect data on everything. Do you ever question, like, are we collecting too much data?
Yes. My team definitely questions that when they have to submit their monthly data reports every month. I think in some ways, you never really know what number you need until you don't have it. And so in some ways that what we collect has happened over time, and realizing like we've been asked for this information or we've been asked this question, and so now it's something that we need to start measuring. We've definitely stopped measuring things when we realized we didn't have a purpose for them. For example, we used to specifically measure out the amount of cotton, poly, and wool that we sort out. And what we found over time is that the technologies who are looking for 100% poly, 100% cotton, 100% wool aren't ready to take volume. So we measured that for 5 years. The technology is not ready to take volume for recycling yet. So we stopped measuring that, but we have the data historically to tell them what percentages we see in the waste stream, but there's no need to continue doing that if we're not there yet in the industry. So we try not to be superfluous with the work that we're creating for ourselves, but we do want to be able to have answers and show impact. And I think that's always where we end up making decisions is, does this answer a question for us or show the impact of our work?
Clementine, staying on the theme of data, I'm curious, making the assumption that you guys also collect different types of data, has there been anything surprising to you in the data that you've collected, whether it's in the data itself or in the manner in which you're collecting? Is there something that you didn't expect going in?
Of course, I mean, there always is. I mean, yeah, just to list a couple of surprises. So, we're now working in, I would say maybe somewhere like 60, 70 villages. I don't know if that's an overestimate, but quite a few different villages and hamlets. And these are all villages with similar socioeconomic profile, similar agricultural patterns. Our business is all based around, installing solar assets and then getting them to be as used as possible. And we see a huge amount of variation. So some, solar pumps, for example, they run, over 200, 250 days in a year. Some are running for a lot less than that. So we're always trying to get to the bottom of why these, why this happens. And a lot of it, there might be due to sort of, small differences in, some farmers are growing more of something or some of the other. But I think a lot of it is also down to human behavior and some of our, we actually hire farmers to run our solar pumps. And some of them I think are a lot more invested and understand, really actually the mission behind what we're doing and their role to play in it more than others might, who might be sort of a little bit more relaxed about things. So yeah, so that's one sort of puzzling thing that we're trying to get to the bottom of. Yeah, I mean, there are constant surprises. I mean, mostly positive. We actually recently did an external impact assessment. And so this is the first time that we have a tendency to survey our customers quite a lot. I mean, we were saying data overkill. I mean, not sure we've quite reached that stage yet because we still, we use all the data that we collect, but we do regularly survey our customers to ask about, how satisfied they are with our services and how we can improve. And yeah, so recently we had this external impact assessment done over the phone, and actually I was quite surprised by the quality, of the data. So, 300 or so farmers were called up by an external agency, and they were actually able to, clearly tell about the benefits that they, get from switching from diesel to solar, and how they, want to continue working with us. And we found that, roughly 80% of them have, totally moved on from using fossil fuel, and they don't intend to ever go back to it. And yeah, that was a nice sort of validation that, we're doing the right thing. Of course, our customers are always happy to give us feedback and room, where there's room for improvement. But yeah, I mean, it is generally useful to have those feedback loops. And then of course we can use that information to then, convince other farmers to come on board and to start working with us.
You're in the world of renewables, and it is perhaps maybe the most quickly evolving industry that we have. Are you seeing new opportunities for entrepreneurs? You talked about business model innovation earlier on. Are you seeing this sector being a real ripe area for entrepreneurs to come in and build something disruptive?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so, I've been working in this sort of climate space for about 10 years now. And there's always been a sort of, I mean, initially it's now evolved quite a bit, but initially there was definitely a heavier focus on new technologies. So like, what can we build? Investors get really excited about something that's still in the lab, even if it's going to take a lot of time to actually get it to market. And I think that that's evolved, and now there is a lot more recognition that, okay, I mean, of course, I'm not saying we still do need more technology innovation in a lot of areas. But equally, we have a huge amount of mature technologies that are just, they're ready for use. You can buy them off the shelf, but they're not reaching all the right people. And there might be, large swathes of the human population that are not able to access them. And therefore, the climate related and other challenges, they persist. So yeah, I think there's a huge opportunity for entrepreneurs to take, robust, proven technologies and scale them to, parts of the world or consumer segments that are not able to access them, maybe due to lack of financing or other barriers, lack of awareness, for example. Yeah, so I would say, like, to new entrepreneurs who, especially those who are a bit impatient like me and want to make a difference sooner rather than later, then yeah, the business model innovations can be a really powerful way to do that.
And Nidhi, when we talk about reducing food waste, I think it's something that so many of us in the Western world think about. I walk through my local supermarket and I wonder what happens to all the food that doesn't get purchased, right? Or I just look at the food on my own table that isn't consumed by my family and just how much goes to waste. Are you seeing specific areas where technology can play a real critical role in reducing that amount of food waste?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one very important part is the cost of aggregation is way too high in this. That's why we need technologies that can convert the food to valuable, whether it is food ingredients or like animal feed products, like whatever is the end use, whatever we want to do, whether even if it's manure, uh, it needs to happen at the source. So we need more technologies that are more mobile or can like do really different types of things, because there are so many different stakeholders in this entire value chain. You are one as like an individual customer, maybe you require a very different type of innovation versus something like a restaurant owner for whom it is important to not throw away the food but to preserve it for a longer period of time. Or for a farmer, for him it's important that the value that he gets does not get destructed, because already he has invested resources such as land, water, labor, capital, or has already gone in. So there are so many different stakeholders in the value chain, and the innovation for each is different. I mean, we do work in food wastage, but I cannot emphasize more that prevention is better than cure. So rather than finding innovations that are able to, you know, add some value to it, and it does not go to landfill and then emit methane and greenhouse gases, it's better to even prevent it. So that exercise requires a lot of awareness at an individual and a customer level, and that makes it a little challenging. So, but the waste to value sort of an industry has progressed really, really well, and there are definitely newer and newer innovations coming in.
So I want to stay on the theme of challenging, but I want to switch gears a little bit here and talk about you and the role of entrepreneurs. I think one of the things that I so admire about the Global Good Fund is that they are looking at and supporting those entrepreneurs that typically have very limited resource, who are trying to tackle some of the hardest, biggest problems that the world faces. There's a tension in that, right? Limited resource, tackle big problem. I'm curious how you all approach this world of the limited resources that you have, and how do you use that even to your advantage? Jessica.
Sorry. I think tension is the right word. And I think one of the ways that I've approached that, me and my co-founder have always tried to do what we can with what we have. And sometimes that is a small opportunity. Sometimes that's a small amount of money. Sometimes that's a really small team. But if you take the whole scope of the problem and think you have to solve every piece of it right away, it's very, very overwhelming. And so we try and start small with what we have and do what we can locally. There's textile waste all over the globe. We're just trying to address what's happening in the US. Particularly, we started in New York and then we opened in Philly. We're still fundraising to open on the West Coast. And so I think it's, some of that tension gets relieved very purposely by us keeping our sights on scope creep, like avoiding scope creep, and that there's so many things that we could get involved in. There's so many parts of this problem that we're being asked to address sometimes that are just beyond the scope of what's possible for us as an individual, the stage of our org, the size of our team. And so that's really what we've tried to flag for each other, of like, this feels like a step outside of what our main mission is, and trying to stay focused on that.
Clementine, how have limited resources impacted your work?
Yeah, I mean, this I think is an interesting problem, but actually I think sometimes it can sort of help, and I'll tell you why. The one is obviously when you have more limited resources, I think you have to be smarter about how you solve problems. Like you have to think a bit more critically about it. Of course, we do, in some cases we've done these kind of brainstorming exercises where we think, I don't know if you know the feast or famine type way of methodology, but you think about in a feast scenario where you have unlimited resources, how would you solve a problem? And then in a famine scenario where you have very, very limited resources, how would that approach change? And often you find that there are ways you could go about in solving things, with less time, less people, and less money than you would ideally have liked. So that's one thing. And I think another key element is trying to attract the right people to work with. So obviously, limited resources means, you might not be able to pay the highest salaries on the market. I mean, that's pretty normal, especially in a social enterprise. But you also might have to focus on attracting the right people who are the most passionate. And I think this is something that we've, generally been really good at. I mean, I'm, really proud of our team, and I think a lot of them are very, talented people, but also they're doing this work for the right reason, which is that, they want to make a difference. And of course, it's also, there's a lot of, interesting opportunities for them to learn and challenge themselves that also come with that. So yeah, I think it's about attracting, smart and very passionate people to your mission, and that can also, make a huge difference, even if you don't have unlimited resources. If those people are like-minded and they're really determined to solve a problem, then that might actually be a bigger advantage than you realize. And the other thing about, running an impactful company that I found is that, not just in terms of who you hire, but it also attracts a lot of people who somehow want to help. So we get approached all the time by like amazing people. They might already be working with other organizations, but they just want to give their time and their expertise to help us, grow and to just be a part of, our growth story. And that always amazes me, the sort of generosity of others. But obviously it's centered around, they have an interest in our work and they want to see it succeed. So I'm not trying to only make it sound positive. Obviously, sometimes it can be really difficult to not have the resources that you want. But yeah, it can also, there's always two sides to that coin. And the final element I would say is that it does force you to work in partnership. I mean, you can't be everywhere and you can't solve every problem. So in some cases, you might have to find partners who are just solving another piece of the puzzle that you weren't able to solve yourself.
Yeah, and that reframing that you did, right? When you said, I'm not trying to make it sound like it's all positive, but I think that reframing is really important for us as entrepreneurs to go on yet another day, right? To wake up yet one more morning and say, I'm going to put in the work again today, despite all of the limitations I have, despite the stresses, despite the anxieties. That reframing exercise, I know for me, has been invaluable. Because it just gets you to maybe see things in a slightly different perspective. Nidhi, what about yourself? Are you reframing the limitations at all?
Yes, but answering to the first question, which is, how do you work in a resource constrained way, is I think apart from what Jessica and Clementine said, what is being focused, and that's important. But for us, it has always been what is orbit shifting and what can last long. So we only want to take activities that is like not only helping our farmers come out of poverty and they are fluctuating all the time, but also is like, say, doubles down their household income, so that and the impact we create is long lasting, that it can at least last 5 years, that whatever through the activities that they're doing with us is it meaningful. I think the second other thing is when you have more your resource constraint, it is good to also make some bold choices, which is be more focused on the problem and not rather than like your solution, because as engineers we all want to experiment too many things and want to get like results, but sometimes it's also important to cut down on some of those noise and just take 2 or 3 bets and go a lot more deeper into it, and definitely not reinvent the value chain, or reinvent the solutions that are already available, and just consolidate it in a way. So apart and answering to your next question, which is, are you reframing? Yes, and I think that is the only way you can go. You can be a lot more persistent. It can help you focus in your work. We know it's a tough journey. We know that we have signed up for it, and though there are days that are really challenging, but what helps is like a great team, and also that each day it's taking you a little bit closer to what your mission is.
I'm curious, who are some of the heroes that you look up to? And maybe those are individuals or organizations that are in your current industry or maybe they're outside of, but who are some of those people or companies that you either aspire to be like, or you sort of hold up in a positive light and say, it's unbelievable what they've accomplished and I can learn a lot from them? Jessica?
I mean, the one that comes to mind is Aurora James. She's the founder of First Brother Bellies, which is a really incredible shoe line that does a lot of work on sustainability and giving opportunities to designers in other countries. But more importantly, founder of the 15% Pledge, which during 2020 was asking major retailers to devote 20% of their retail space to Black-owned companies. And so that, because she's sort of in the fashion world, but also because of the work that she's doing in social justice and seeing her run now 2 organizations, don't know her personally, but am just really inspired from following her on Instagram.
Clementine?
I think this is a tricky question because, I mean, personally, I'm not, one of those people who's driven by a specific individual or, that sort of tries to emulate a specific person. And there's many sort of different forces there that motivate me and sort of have shaped me. But one person that I do look up to, so is Donald Baird from Block Power. So he's a founder of Block Power. He was actually one of the people that interviewed my co-founder and I when we were just starting out right at the very beginning, and we applied for the Echoing Green Fellowship. And then, sort of seen his journey a little bit along the last few years. What his company is doing is basically retrofitting buildings in disadvantaged communities in the US with energy efficient heating and cooling systems. And yeah, they've also built a software company to sort of manage those buildings in a smart way. So they're able to save huge amounts of money and carbon for those buildings, but also, give those low income communities much safer and cheaper source of energy. And apart from their model, which has now been adopted at a much larger scale, they've raised tens of millions to actually make a dent. I really think a substantial dent in carbon emissions. But I also love the way they've partnered with so many different stakeholders. I think that's really impressive. I mean, they're working with governments, they're working with municipalities, they're working with private investors, and obviously communities themselves. And I think that kind of cross-sector collaboration is really difficult to do in practice. So yeah, that's one example.
That's a good one. Nidhi, anybody come to mind for you?
Yeah, I have three people. First is Savitribai Phule. She was the first female teacher in India. Actually, the reason why all of us are in school. So definitely owe a lot of our education to her. I'm also inspired by Martin Luther King Jr. I really like the concept of development as a freedom, what he had, and Amartya Sen also who carried that forward in his book. Apart from both of them, someone that I really look up to is Chobani's CEO. I have so much respect for him just because he's able to really integrate like a social problem and also being very commercially successful. So building an organization that does not compromise on equity on people, but also is creating returns for like commercial capital that comes in. So the CEO of Patagonia and Chobani are like my recent inspiring.
Just a note about Yves Chenard. If any of you have not read the book, Let My People Go Surfing, Yves is the founder of Patagonia. I highly recommend it. It is a wonderful book about culture and the story of building Patagonia, which I too have an immense amount of respect for. As entrepreneurs, as early stage innovators, clearly capital is always in need. For yourselves and for the audience, have you, for the three of you, have you looked at going after grants and received them or not? Has that been a source of funding for the three of you? Yes. And where have you found those pools of capital, specifically in the form of non-dilutive grants? Not all at once.
All right, I'll start. The answer is pretty much everywhere. So So we've received, I mean, in the early days, because we're doing solar assets, so we obviously needed some capital to even get started and try out this innovative business model that we have. So we raised capital. Well, I actually mentioned one of them already from Echoing Green, who like to bet on super, super early stage social entrepreneurs this was even before we had anything on the ground. So yeah, and then I mean, we've raised from different sources. Some are, philanthropic foundations. We always look for the ones that have a strong mission alignment with us. So, it might be their North Star is, poverty alleviation. It might be environmental. It might be, something else. And then more and more, I mean, there are, of course, impact investors, and they fall on different sort of parts of the spectrum. Some impact investors also actually do grant funding because they're cognizant of, when you're working with, maybe very marginalized populations and you're trying to build a business in a very, totally new environment or just more challenging environment, that you might need to grant capital at the beginning, at least to subsidize what you're doing. So we've also raised from certain impact investors and philanthropic investors, as well as governments. So, for example, we've raised from different agriculture, water, energy, and food related programs of different governments, so U.S. government, European governments, who are looking to sort of scale innovations in a specific sector. And then also the favorite of very early stage entrepreneurs is probably business plan competitions. I think it's easy to waste a lot of time on these, but there are some business plan competitions that we actually found to be useful, either because they, of course, some of them gave us a grant, but also often you get exposure or networking opportunities or other things like that that can actually be really helpful at the early stage of building a company. So yeah, it's always a bit of a trade-off, right, between building your business and applying for grants. But I think, for us, it paid off.
And Jessica and E.T., either of you?
A lot of the same. There's government grants and a lot of like small local grants for companies in the New York City area that we've applied for and work with. I would say one of the major difference for us is the corporate grants. A lot of the brands and companies and corporations that we recycle with also have philanthropic arms of their businesses, and so we apply for quite a few corporate grants as well.
E.T.?
Yes, I think for us, it's also to find these keywords where we fit in. So say gender, energy, access, agriculture are some of the things where we fit in, livelihoods. We have not actively reached out to foundations like through a cold email, but we do apply to various call for actions for grants. So we do keep on looking for these opportunities. This could be through like a global good fund. I do think that you need to get into like a few of them that are that then like you keep on receiving a lot of inbound opportunities who collated, whether it is Cartier's women, like you'll find these opportunities on their website, or One Young World. So I think we have focused a little bit more on the challenges, open challenges that come. We don't so that like that how many spots are there, accelerators where are they going to give some money. We also work with various partners and nonprofits who can then attract capital for our project. So yes, apart from individual fellowships for founders that give you those initial grants, the typical are the ones with USAID or DFIs who have some specific programs, and based on your keywords, you will be able to find it in some places.
And sticking with raising capital for a second, I know one of the mistakes that I made after raising grant funding and moving into private investment was that I didn't understand my audience well enough. And what I mean by that is when you're putting a pitch deck together for traditional either angel investment or venture capital, whether it's traditional venture or impact, there's sort of a formula. It's not a law, it's not a rule, but there's an expectation on the audience, like I'm going to receive X amount of slides, these are going to be the key frames that are included. And the mistake that I made was trying to probably tell too long of a story. I'm curious, are there any key ideas or key suggestions, key learnings that you would share with the audience about building a pitch deck and how to go about doing that for your intended audience? Nidhi, please.
Yes, I think narrative is really important. We are now into our Series B round, which has no impact investor, but majorly commercial investors coming in, and they want to visualize or they want to put us in a box. We hate that. We hate that. What should they relate us to? Whether it is a public market company or is it like another company in the business, whether it's B2B commerce or whatever these buzzwords are. We used to be really apprehensive about these and like really dislike them. But what we understood was that it really helped them to understand the business better and find correlations. So we do have like a master deck where we first list out everything that is required for a business from an impact narrative as well as from a commercial narrative, and then pick and choose. There are some impact funds you know that via like you would know what their LPs are, so you would know what sort of a narrative they want. Some of them are in energy access, so you want to start with like basically what is changing is your problem and your solution. So I think those two slides are for us like always changing. So customization really helps because it helps to tell our story a lot more better. And so have like a teaser deck which is then customized for their understanding, and then like a master deck or an IM that is, see, all of them want financial model which is not something like they discount on, or they would want like different kind of returns. Both impact investors, other investors want similar, so those things can be similar. They all want data room, that needs to be there. But yes, the way you pitch it, or what you are solving for, or how you are what your solution is, definitely needs to be very different.
Clementine, would you agree with that? Anything you'd add?
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of what Nidhi says we do as well. But I think also, yeah, it starts from knowing the investor, and this is actually something I've come to really enjoy, is like interviewing the investor to find out more about them. So like, what really drives them? Like, where does their money come from? What's their timeline? What are their goals? And what are some kind of non-negotiables? And what are their expectations? So yeah, I think doing that early on can help to kind of hone the pitch, because of course there'll be some things that, you know, they are just not interested in scaling, or they're not interested in investing in, and they really, you know, might be your core business, might be adding new things, might be how you use the capital. So I think, yeah, asking a lot of questions early on to understand them better can, you know, can help you get there even before you send a pitch deck. Another thing that I've learned is that it's not really related to the pitch deck, but more about how you sort of convey the information. And you know, unfortunately, because it's more expensive and less carbon, you know, friendly, but I have found that meeting investors in person does help to build a relationship, because, you know, that is what you're doing. You're building a long-term relationship. And yeah, being able to pitch in person, obviously, you know, gives a lot more opportunity to get to know each other, for them to ask lots of questions, for you to ask questions. So, you know, generally in an ideal scenario, those have been the, you know, the successful relationships we've built. We've often met the investors in person, not always, but often. And another thing is, so yeah, of course, it's about, you know, crafting a narrative, telling a story, but I think the best way for anyone to understand the business or the, you know, the work that you do is to see it on the ground and meet your team. So yeah, as much as we can, we encourage, you know, our new partners or investors to go and see the work we do on the ground and actually, you know, meet our customers and see it with their own eyes, because that just makes everything a lot more clear. And then you can really start an informed conversation where they do actually know what you're doing. And yeah, those are some of the kind of key things that we've done with, you know, prospective investors, so that we can, you know, all be on the same page.
I love what you said there on several fronts. One, that this is a mutual partnership. We are aligned in going forward. And two, the idea of really coming together in person as much as possible to feel where one another are in this journey, whether it's the work in the field or, hey, my capital is being entrusted to your organization. Those are two things that I deeply respect and absolutely applaud you for. Jessica, how about you?
Early on, when I was sort of pitching FabScrap, I found that investors were not interested as soon as they heard that we were a nonprofit, because we have no equity to give. And so I actually stopped working on a pitch deck at that point, because it just wasn't, investors weren't going to be like our avenue to fundraise. But in working with large donors, I would echo what Clementine said, is where you can build a personal relationship has been really helpful. Also for me, it's been having a really explicit plan set out for them of where their donation is going and how the funds are going to be used, and not just what that means for like the next 2 years, but the long-term impact of where that money is going and what it means for our organization. Being able to show that that there's a plan for the money, there's impact attached to it, has been really helpful. I will say I have not spent a lot of time on the pitch deck, but I have pitched a lot. Actually, I started FabScrap by pitching it on a television show, not Shark Tank, but something very similar. And so in that way too, what I learned from that process is it's so much practice. Even on the day that we filmed, I did the pitch 3 times because they wanted to make sure they had a very clean cut of all of the right inflections, the right questions. So I think just the more that you can practice and be really solid on numbers, impact, the story is helpful.
I appreciate those different perspectives because we really all do come at this from a different place, right? A place from where you're starting, a place to where you eventually want to go, the types of investors, the story you're telling, the emphasis on commercialization and impact, how you balance that out. So it's nice to hear each of your different perspectives. We only have a few minutes left, and what I'd love to close with is maybe in Shark Tank style, just a short sort of conclusion, really 2 things. One, where can people find out about you? I know that the Global Good Fund team is posting our LinkedIn profiles in the chat and anybody can reach out to you that way, but is there a place that you would want someone to learn more about you or your organization? And 2, where do you hope that this really goes? Where do you see I think not just your individual organization, but where do you think this world of sustainability can ultimately go? And we'll close with that. Nidhi, please have the first word.
Yes, you can find me on LinkedIn and more about our organization on our website. I hope that together we can make more vulnerable people more resilient to climate change.
Clementine?
Oops, sorry, struggled to find the mic. Yeah, so similarly, I think our LinkedIns are already there, and our website is also, I'm sure, will be pasted in the chat. Where I hope this goes, I mean, for us, we're tackling a much, much bigger problem than a single organization can, realistically set out to solve. So what we hope to do is to demonstrate that we can build a scalable business model that, really impacts last mile smallholder farmers, and that others will imitate us and partner with us so that we can end the reliance on fossil fuel and build a sustainable economy that works for everyone.
Jessica, the last word is yours.
Oh, thanks. I'm putting our website and also FabScraps and my Instagram in the chat. Instagram tends to be where we do most of our sharing these days. So I'll add those for you guys. And long term, there's a couple of things. We'd really like to expand across the US to at least address textile waste and the design that's happening here. But more importantly, we really want to use all of our data to inform some of the policy that's happening globally around textile waste and accountability in the fashion industry. There is some new legislation that's just been introduced to Congress that FabScrap has signed on in support of. And so I think there's a lot of change possible within the fashion industry as one of the greatest polluting industries.
I want to thank you all. It's been a joy getting to hear your individual stories. I will hand it back over to Michelle to close us out.
A huge, huge thank you to all of you, Nidhi, Clementine, Jessica, and Jeff for moderating. It's been amazing to go through your stories and your experiences and hear about your dedication to environmental conservation, whether it be through fashion or through the land. So it's clear that we all have a role to play in creating a more sustainable, green, and equitable future. And you guys are the pioneers in this. So we appreciate everything you're doing. And thank you, everyone who attended today, for your participation and commitment to positive change. So we hope to see you at our next panel. Have a wonderful, wonderful day. Take care.